Hello, this is Sharon Leishman with Duwamish Alive Coalition on Rainier Avenue Radio with our new local environmental program, Duwamish Alive. And we believe Earth Day should be every day, and understanding our natural world is that we live in is both critical, not only to the health of our environment, but also to our communities as well. So we've been talking about our Duwamish watershed, its ecosystem, and also salmon, which are a really important part of our watershed. So we're going to kind of continue on from the program with Catherine Lynch, who talked about salmon, and move forward in talking about different elements of it. So just as kind of a review of it, why Pacific salmon are so important to us is that, they've had thousands of years to evolve with our, region's ecosystems. So with that, they have become a really important part of our Pacific Northwest. And that's why they have become a keystone species, which is a species that a lot of other species are dependent upon for their life. And not only, when you consider it, it's not only the wildlife that's dependent upon salmon, but it's also our indigenous Salish tribes and even our communities, because they're a huge economic part of the Northwest. So that's why, we're spending time understanding, our salmon. These salmon, and first I just want to say this is an amazing species. I'm always amazed at it because when you think about it, their life begins on some of our creeks, streams, the upriver region of our watershed, and they start life as an egg, a fertilized egg. And then as they develop into young salmon, they're traveling down this river, it's like close to 70 miles long. And for juveniles to come down that river, and they get out into Elliott Bay, out into the Puget Sound, and then they go out to the Pacific Ocean. I mean, this river, if you look at it, it's the main blue line that stretches from Seattle all the way down to Mount Rainier. So that's a huge, journey just to get out to the ocean. And in this passage of getting to the ocean, in the river around Tequila, they start changing. They have a biological change from freshwater fish to saltwater. And that interchange happens around in the Tequila section of the river. So these fish, then they go out to the ocean. They live most of their lives for years out in the ocean, and each species will stay there for a different, amount of time. And then they find their way back to the same place that they were born in, to the exact same creek or river. And that's where they start their the next generation, which is amazing that these fish have that life journey. So they are just such a special species. But it's a species that unfortunately has had a lot of challenges. And those challenges really started with colonization, because as settlers moved into this region, they first started logging, and there's been this gradual deterioration of their habitat. So they started logging, of course, and mining, because they mined coal, right? And then that logging, then you had farming that came in, and all these were small increments that started to really degrade the habitat for the salmon. And then as that, the farming, then you had more population coming in, and these historically, before colonization, a lot of the historical records tell of these stories of this, like all these salmon, and they were huge salmon. And they were like, there were stories saying you could not throw a rock in any part of the river during spawning season and not hit a salmon. So with this bounty of salmon, then there became overfishing. And so there was, a period of time when they were just really overfished. And at that same time, then you also had industrialization coming in, and especially in the Duwamish Valley, and then urbanization. So all of these changes really impacted the, the health of the salmon and their habitat. So we have been seeing really reduction in the amount of salmon that do spawn, to the point where some of the species are now threatened. And that doesn't only affect, when we talk about wildlife, we think about what's, on the lands, right? But it also affects the marine life too, because of our southern resident orca really depend on Chinook salmon. And that is one of the 5 species that we do have in the river. We're really fortunate that this river is home to all 5 species: the Chinook, the coho, sockeye, pink, and chum. And so again, fall is the best time to see the salmon coming up the river. The Chinook, they start returning in kind of mid-late July, and they'll go through September, but actually their spawning period ends in December. Coho are from September through November, and then chum they're coming up the river now, and that'll last November, December. And then pink salmon are really interesting because they only spawn on the odd years. You'll never see them spawning on even years. So this is a pink, we call it a pink year. And that's not because we wear pink, but it's because the pink salmon are coming up as well. So it's still a great time to get out and see the salmon. So one of the best places to go see the salmon would be to take a trip down to Auburn area and go to Flaming Geyser Park, which is beautiful at this time of year. The colors are amazing. They have wonderful hikes along the river, and you can see the salmon, spawning in the river. So we just highly recommend to go out and see them and discover a new place along the river. So, what were you talking about? Okay, we do have this, dwindling habitat, dwindling salmon returns. So what can we do to help? And what does a healthy salmon habitat look like? So for what salmon need they need, first and foremost, clean, clear, oxygenated water. And what I mean by that is that they're very sensitive to water temperature and pollution. So ideally, the temperature of water needs to be between 55 and 64 degree Fahrenheit. And once it starts getting above those temperatures, then higher temperatures start affecting the health of the fish, not only from the egg stage, but also, through the juvenile stage to adult. So that's one of the key things. And it needs to be, they're very susceptible to pollution. And at the University of Washington in Tacoma, they recently were able to identify the chemical that was causing pre-spawn mortality in coho salmon. Then pre-spawn mortality means that the females died just before they were able to release their eggs for fertilization. And nobody knew for years and years what was affecting that. And they finally figured it out. It was part of the tire dust that comes off our tires that has this 6-ppq chemical in it, and that is what's causing the problem. So that is being worked on, but they're very susceptible to pollution and all kinds of pollution. And then they need really oxygenated water, and as you see from this diagram, see how the water is flowing in all different ways. It's going over rocks, it's going over, tree stumps. Every time it's going over, and it's collecting oxygen, incorporating that in water. And salmon really need that. They also need a stable flow. So when we get these big torrential rain and floods, that is not helpful to them. And then in the summer, when now, the river levels are so low, again, that's not a healthy situation for them as well. So they need a stable flow source. And then the stream bed, especially where in their spawning areas, the stream bed needs to be clean, loose gravel, which again protects their nests, which are called redds, so that the water that is flowing over the eggs and is well oxygenated so that eggs do hatch. Again, as you look at this, you'll see a healthy stream, stream river banks that has, native plants. And those native plants are also attracting the insects that fall into the river that the fish eat. So, they need a healthy stream, bank, but they also need they also need other, like branches and things in the water that help kind of mix it up and keep the flow going. And lastly, they do need like side channels. And what we say are these are little inlets along the river where the juvenile salmon can get out of the main river flow and then rest, and they're protected and they can eat. And like in the Tequila area where you get this exchange of salt and fresh water, it gives their bodies time to, gradually adjust to going into the ocean. So this is really, what a healthy habitat is for salmon. Now, if we look, just the opposite is bad habitat. And this one, as you can see, it's pretty much devoid of, healthy vegetation, native vegetation along the stream bank. It doesn't have, the water's not mixing much. There's just not a lot of, woody debris. And if you look at the very bottom, it's not gravelly soil, it's sediment, which, they can't, nest in. So the arrows indicate how pollution's coming in, and what this probably should have are a lot of houses and industry and that kind of thing in it as well. And so, the threats to salmon really go back to a lot of those elements I just talked about, is that, the habitat loss and how it's been degraded, and it goes back to, the, logging and mining, and then the industrialization and urbanization. All of this has really diminished habitat for them. And I have to say, currently we're talking about, the Duwamish Valley has been, for the past 100 years, has been industrialized. And to the point where a lot of that industrialization, the waste from it was dumped directly into the river, to the point where it was so highly polluted that it was designated as a Superfund site. And the Superfund program, so there was only a handful of these sites that were in such bad condition that were designated this way by the federal government, that allowed funds to start cleaning up this river and in this area in the lower Duwamish. So that has been, it's been a couple decades long effort. It's still continuing. It's still an issue, but now most of the pollution is really coming from, they call it non-source point pollution. So it's mainly coming from, our yards. It's coming through the stormwater system, and like off the roads, that kind of thing. So, I mean, we're making progress, but now we really need to be focusing on, what our stormwater runoff. So that is one of the main sources of pollution. But other threats, climate change has become a big one, because not only does it's changing our weather dramatically here. So, and I think everybody knows now that, snowpack, something that we've always taken for granted, our snowpack is really changing, and it's, we're getting less snow. It's staying, it's not staying in the mountains as long as it had been. And so the snowpack is really important, because it was a source of cold water to our streams and rivers during the summer. And so it was the steady kind of, melt off that kept water in our rivers in the summer and in our fall. And so now, what we're seeing is warmer temperatures because of, lower melt off, right? But we're also getting really warm summers. So that combination of those two things is really impacting, our the water health for salmon. And then it also means that when they're out, the salmon are out in the ocean, our ocean temperatures are rising as well. And I just want to go back a little bit to, when we get higher temperatures in the water, it also reduces the amount of oxygen in the water for the salmon as well. So it's kind of like a triple whammy for the salmon. And then lastly, again, with the water, we get these now really intense rainstorms that cause flooding. And when you get that amount of water coming down all at once, that is a pretty negative for the salmon to deal with as well. And we kind of call that flashiness, where you get these not a stable flow, but you get these dramatic highs and lows of flows. And that's really difficult for salmon as well. So, and then, lastly for it, dams. And I know this is a really hot button topic now, especially on the snake rivers, because there's so much discussion, should we remove the dams? And the reason dams are an issue is because they are a barrier for salmon to access really high quality habitat for spawning. And we've seen on the Green Duwamish River, we have seen the Howard Hanson Dam, which is up, it's closer to Mount Rainier, and that dam was built pretty much to prevent flooding in the Kent Valley and the Duwamish Valley. So that was a really critical dam to put in. However, when it was built, it was not built with any way of the fish passage. And so you could not get salmon cannot access this huge area of really high quality habitat. Now, there's been a lot of effort from our different levels of our state to get federal funding to provide fish passage. That funding was on the table, it was going to happen. And with this past federal administrative change, that funding has been put on hold. So, at this point, we're not sure we're going to have that happen. But I also want to say that we've had other, like in the Elwha River, 2 dams, and I'll come back and say every dam doesn't last forever. It has an expiration date, right? And so on the Elwha, they had 2 dams on that river, and they were definitely no longer producing hydropower, which is what they were built for. So those dams were taken down, and immediately, like in the next 2 years after being taken down and that area restored, people started seeing the Chinook come back, and they started coming back in big numbers. So we know that if we can help nature and take down some of these barriers, improve habitat, this is a resilient species, and we can help bring them back. So, it comes down to, what we can do as individuals, as a community, and to help these special species that we are so connected with. I am a person who's lived here all my life, and salmon are a part of my identity. They are a part of this whole, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, they are part of your identity. So one of the first things that's pretty simple to do is just watch what you're using on your property in your daily life, because whatever, if you're using, like in your yard, if you can use natural care products, that's so much better than chemical ones. The herbicides, the pesticides, the chemical fertilizers, because not only do they add pollutants, because that runoff, that water that does run off your property into that storm drain, that ultimately comes out somewhere, and generally it's coming out into either Puget Sound or to the Duwamish River, or a creek or stream or ditch next to you that ends up in Puget Sound. So instead, of using chemicals on your property, look for alternatives, natural care alternatives, and try and keep the water on your property if you can, by using rain barrels, which might need to be a little bigger now, but you could also put in like small rain gardens that capture the water. And actually, by capturing the water on your site, then it actually goes into the ground. And what we've seen from a lot of different research studies is that soil is a really good filter for pollutants. And then your water also refreshes the aquifer underneath. So there's so many really positive elements to doing this and trying to keep it on, on your property. And when I say chemicals, that also means your car, so fix your leaks. If you can, take your car to a car wash because they reuse that water all the time. And then also when you're out and about, if you have good pet care means also, scooping the poop and putting it in, the garbage, not a recycle bin, but in the garbage. Because again, studies have shown in some of our creeks and all, there's just a high level of fecal matter that's getting into them. And that's just, scooping up your poop solves that problem. And then, we're talking about being careful about your water usage as well, because again, in the summer, like this past summer, we had lower snowpack and water is becoming an issue. Educate yourself like you're doing now, and then, report problems. So if you see pollution in the water, call Puget Soundkeeper Alliance. That's what they do. They look for polluters. And then go talk to your leaders, your community leaders, your political leaders, and really share how much you care about the species and you care about our environment and you care about our region. So with that, look for ways. And then lastly, volunteer. You can go to our website, duwamishalive.org, and you can see our partners who have, just wonderful opportunities to volunteer, either like with Puget Soundkeepers on the water, they go kayaking, or our other partners who do a lot of, habitat restoration, where you're planting native plants and taking out invasives, or you can do even salmon studies or pollution studies. So there's just a lot of ways to get involved and meet great people, and really do something beneficial for our salmon, but also our communities and our environment. So get out there this weekend. Go hiking, enjoy our fall, and go see some salmon while they're still here. So anyway, this is Sharon Leishman with the Duwamish Alive Coalition on Rainier Avenue Radio, and we are introducing our new environmental program, Duwamish Alive, that is really focused on this amazing river that we all enjoy. So thank you, and see you next time.